Joining us now, Congressman, Republican, 2nd District of Virginia, sits on the Appropriations Committee, former Navy SEAL Scott Taylor. Congressman Taylor, good to have you with us.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Yesterday, well, do we have a deal in the Senate? Could it be? Is it true? Patty Murray getting together with Lamar Alexander and intimating yesterday that they had a deal. Patty Murray, the Democrat senator from Washington, Lamar Alexander, the Republican from Tennessee, said they had reached a, get this, bipartisan deal that would extend payments to insurers under Obamacare that President Trump said he was ending last week. Now, these two senators, Scott, chairman and ranking member, respectively, of the Senate Health Committee, the president, as you know, on Friday night saying, these cost-sharing payments, they're illegal. I'm done with that. I'm not going to continue to fund Obamacare. If Congress wants to do it, they're going to have to appropriate the funds because, that's what's in the Constitution. Even though the government has paid these now for 50 months, including 8 months in the Trump administration. What say you about all this, Scott Taylor?
Well, let me first say I'm an optimist typically, but I'm cautious with the Senate, and they say they have a deal and they're ready to go because, as you know very, very well, we have, I think, 278 bills sitting in the Senate right now that we've passed through the House this year. Obviously, they failed on the first attempt and the second and then maybe the third on Obamacare repeal and replace. So we'll see. We'll see if they actually have a deal or not. I agree with the president. I think he's done a couple things now where he's put it back into Congress where it rightfully is, where you've actually seen the separation of powers, how it's supposed to work. So I don't disagree with the president's move to do that because, just like with the Iran deal, which is a treaty, just with like DACA, which is, if you're going to do something, those things have to happen on the legislative branch. So where you had the last president who overstepped his authority, his constitutional authority, this president is bringing that back into realignment, to the chagrin of many folks on the other side. But we'll see what happens with the Senate if they actually have a deal or not.
All right. Well, look, optimism is always a good thing. We'll see what happens. We just heard, though, for instance, in Pennsylvania, the premiums are going up, Scott Taylor, another 32%. Now, this is on top of all of the other increases in the premiums. I think this is basically, it doesn't really matter, right? Like at the end of the day, they're going up all over the place, but they're going up another 32% in Pennsylvania. There's no end in sight with this. And you've got these companies dropping out. The president's trying to initiate something that we can be able to buy it across state lines, but that's going to take a very long time. So the bottom line is you take the $7 billion of these payments, out of funding the various insurance companies or the bailout, if you will. What happens now? I mean, if they don't get a deal, what happens?
Well, I think we have to act. I mean, like I've been saying this for months, leaders must act. We have to act. You see that it is crushing. Premiums are crushing folks, families, working families. They're getting less care. But I think we have to have a revolution in healthcare, just like a lot of other sectors as well too. Why is it that, John Fredericks, you don't know how much a hip replacement would cost in any hospital? You have no idea, right? Why don't we know the transparency? Why don't you have the ability to understand peer-rated, not peer, but consumer-rated doctors and providers and stuff like that? I mean, I think that something like this, where we are right now in healthcare and how the prices are going like crazy. Yes, we need to repeal and replace, but I think we need some disruption in healthcare as well too. Some of these bills, of course, are written by providers, or at least with the input of providers. It's time for a little more input from people. Like for example, when you look at taxis and Uber, right, where it was controlled with a dispatcher, you didn't know who was coming to get you. It took a long time. It was more expensive, and then you had Uber where it's you have the ability to make money, that I know who you are, I know what you're rated, I can decide to have you or not, I can get it, it's cheaper. There needs to be complete disruption in the healthcare industry as well too. Right now you're having like the Democrats trying to keep Medicaid expansion. Some of these programs are from the 1960s, and they're huge bureaucratic layers and stuff like that. And why are we defending mediocrity? That's
exactly it. The program, the whole Obamacare thing has been a disaster Scott Taylor, as you know, for so many people that have been screwed by this, especially the middle class, whose premiums have gone up. Nobody ever saved $2,500. They paid thousands more, and their deductibles have gone up, and they've not been successful with this. And now it's going up further, and look, there's no end in sight. And, you know, some people say that the president is just trying to either, one, implode the system so the Congress can get back to getting something that makes sense, or that he wants the Congress to actually fix the program. But one or the other, you guys have got to do something, because what you're seeing now is just for middle-class working people, Scott Taylor, this Obamacare right now is a complete disaster. And so many of them are dropping out of the system. They're just paying the fine. So it's having the opposite effect of what it was designed to do, right?
There's no question about it. And, you know, though they would argue, oh, well, the Republicans didn't expand Medicaid. It wasn't done like it was supposed to do. And that's all BS. It wasn't allowed to. It was unconstitutional to force states to do that. So they had to have their say. That's the thing we talked about just a little bit earlier, is the constitutionality of the acts of the last president, or the lack thereof, and how this one's changing it. But yes, people are feeling pain. There's no question about it. This is one of the things that we campaigned on. It's one of the things that we continue to hear about. Yes, on the left, they're rabidly trying to keep it there, but the reality is it's hurting a lot more people than it's helping. So we have to act, and the Senate has to act. As I said just a little earlier, we've got 278 bills over there. I'm hopeful that they'll have some kind of deal to move forward, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
We've got to be that way. Okay, Scott Taylor, the president's saying, look, this Iran deal, I campaigned against it. He said it was the worst deal ever made in the history of the Republic for mankind. Now he's saying he's not going to certify the deal, kicking it back to Congress. And now it's up to Congress whether or not to impose sanctions or do nothing. Where do you guys stand on this now?
So let me first say, and I was very clear before as well too about the Iran deal. I agree with the president. It is a bad deal. Let me lay it out for you. What the world has done, quite frankly, is trade short-term global nuclear stability for short-term instability in the region, where you have Iran that has used a lot of the money that we've given them, quite frankly, in Iraq and Syria, as well as they're in Lebanon, they're in Yemen, obviously, they're in Libya, just rooting insecurity, instability, and increasing their influence to try to be regional hegemon there. And at the same time, short term, they're advancing the delivery capabilities for the long term, which is going to, again, where the world has traded that short term global nuclear stability for short term instability. The result is going to be in the region. The result's going to be long-term global instability, because they're going to get nuclear weapons. And then once they get nuclear weapons, they're going to have already advanced their delivery capabilities. They're already going to advance their influence in the region. And guess who's going to have to deal with that? The United States. So I appreciate the opinions of my European folks. And I was doing a show the other day, and they were saying, well, in Europe, we see it as a slowing, not as a stopping of nuclear capabilities. Well, clearly, if you remember President Obama, he wasn't saying we're slowing it. He's saying we're stopping it. And Biden and all that. So the way that he was trying to sell to the American public is not the way that the Europeans were perceiving it. I don't agree with the deal. I don't agree with trying to slow it in this way that makes them stronger, and then long term they're going to be really powerful, and it's us that's going to have to deal with them. I think that that's wrong. I agree with the president. I also think that the Iran deal itself was a treaty, and via the Constitution, that's got to come through the Senate. So I think that the previous president, was acting outside of the Constitution in that regard. So it's going to be tough, of course, in Congress to be able to get a treaty, of course, if at all. But that's the way our Constitution works, and that's what should have happened. So I agree with President Trump to take it back to Congress. I'm already a co-sponsor of some sanctions. In terms of new sanctions, I'll look at those and see if it makes sense. I know that they would, the president would probably want us to look at those and at trigger points to try to bring Iran to get a better deal to the table, with the threat of sanctions. And but I agree with him.
All right, so basically, yeah, let's get Congress to act on this. He's trying to do this the right way. He did the same thing as we opened the segment with the CSR payments, saying that they're illegal. I'm going to stop making them. They're outside of the Constitution, which says that the money has to come from Congress through appropriations. The president can't just decide to pay millions. Just like the president can't say, I need $50 billion for this wall. It's got to go through Congress. So he's trying to do the right thing. No question about it. I got a question here from Brian in Virginia Beach. One of your constituents says, could you please ask Congressman Taylor, what are your thoughts on the tax reform package and if we'll be able to take the standard deductions of mortgage interest?
Well, thanks for your question, Brian. Appreciate it. So for me, I had three things I said on this show before for tax reform that are fundamental to me. Number one, repatriation of the money overseas to get that flow into our economy, money market multiplier. Also was to get down the corporate rate to be competitive. Obviously, we're looking at the corporate rate as well as some pass-throughs as well. And most importantly, the working folks. Middle class is a very subjective word, depending on where you live, how much you make, all that stuff. But people who are working, I believe, really felt like they're getting taken advantage of from the very top, as well as the very bottom, or the capable folks at the bottom. So I think that's the most important thing. So we are reducing deductions. How do I say it? We're compressing brackets to make it obviously a lot less that you'll be paying. The mortgage interest deduction is to remain there. That's right now. There's a framework of tax reform that was agreed upon by the White House, by the Senate, and by the House in terms of just the frame. Now, obviously, details have to be filled in there, and we budget, so the reconciliation instructions are in there. Right now, the Senate is working. They're supposed to have that done in the next week or so. Once they're done with theirs, then you're going to see very quickly what the brackets are.
Oh, looks like we lost Congressman Taylor there for a second, phone disconnected. That happens. So I think what the congressman is saying is, till he calls back in, if you understood him correctly, the bottom line with the president's tax reform package is he's laid out a set of principles, which he's advocating for, which I happen to think, which I agree with. We've got to get this done. They're trying to get tax reform done by Christmas. Possible. They're going to have to work on it, but we don't know what changes are going to be made as this gets out of committees. And so it's tough to debate the nuances of the tax reform package right now because we don't know what exactly it's going to be as it goes through the sausage-making process and the certain principles that the president has said he wants to keep in there, the different rates, getting rid of the loopholes, simplifying the tax code, repatriation, cutting the corporate tax, getting rid of the death tax. All of that remains to be seen. What, if any, stays in it? So therefore, we have not spent a lot of time on the show debating the tax reform package as the president outlined it because we really have no idea at the end of the day what the final product will be. Until we can get there, it's tough to spend a lot of time arguing in detail about different provisions because we don't know if committees will change them as it comes up and gets marked up and goes through the process. So it doesn't make any sense to spend a lot of time on that.